Welcome to week 2 for website development. I want to start off just saying, if you haven't had a chance to already go through the coding standards video and the coding standards that are listed in Blackboard in the side panel, please make sure you're doing that along with watching this video and making sure you're going through all of our notes and reading the chapter. It's important that we make sure that we talk about coding standards because they play a huge role in what we're doing. Those standards are so important for so many different reasons. It's the foundation for anything that we're going to be doing for our web development. We want to make sure that we have well-structured HTML and CSS that's in place. And even if not every company is going to have the exact same coding standards that we have, most of these are pretty standard. Some of them are actually more than just standard, they're actually required. So even if others have a different way of using their standards, we need to make sure that we're adhering to these 17 coding standards because this is going to help us to support responsive web design, our site performance, and to make sure that we're having accessible websites for everyone. And I talk about responsive web design because this is really big. Regardless of our screen size or whatever our viewport is, our web page needs to still be usable. And up on my screen right now, I'm showing you some examples of responsive web designs, where one page is being used to display content slightly different depending on what size viewport we're consuming that material on. We use custom layouts for our different devices based on that. So whatever we think the size of the viewport is, or whatever the typical size is for a viewport, we're going to set some code into our pages to respond differently or to behave differently depending on those. And instead of having different ones for each device, we just use one web page and we write code to make that change happen. Well, we can't do that if we don't have well-structured HTML and CSS, and that's why following our coding standards is paramount to being able to create our responsive design. You'll learn more about creating responsive designs in the advanced CSS course, but if you want to read more about it up until then, there's a really great article that you can read called A List of Parts, and this was written by the person who originally brought responsive web design to the foreground. This was written back in 2010, but the article is amazing and it's a really great way to get you started. But if you want to see an example of a responsive website, we can just go to our Madison College website. So a way that we can see whether or not this is responsive is, for example, take a look at the menu up in the top right hand corner, and as I change my viewport size, watch what happens to that menu. Now, as the menu stands, I'm looking at this as if I'm viewing it on a desktop, but as I get smaller and smaller and smaller, suddenly, there it is, my viewport has gotten smaller, therefore the page had to respond, and it got to a point where that navigation menu on the top was getting too big to support the small screen size, so it condenses it into this particular menu. This is an example of a responsive web design. Based on the browser, based on the size, we're going to see some content shift around. I'll open this back up and let's talk a little bit about accessibility, because for us, failing to make any service accessible is considered a form of discrimination, and if we allow access to web content as a basic human right, then we need to account for that. So websites must be available and usable regardless of the ability of the person using it. Accessibility is going to allow anyone to understand or navigate or perceive content. So generally we look at 4 different categories of impairment. There's visual, motor, auditory, and cognitive. So the W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, is the main international governing body for web and web accessibility, and they began this initiative, the WAI, and they published the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which we also call WCAG or WCAG. You'll get a chance to learn a lot more about those guidelines in detail in the UI UX course for developers, but it's a really good idea to be aware of these principles early on. For now, following our coding standards in this course is going to be what we're going to use to help build that foundation for creating an accessible website. Let's take a look at the WAI. And if we look under Accessibility Fundamentals, an Introduction to Accessibility, you'll get a chance to see this video embedded, and this is the one that you're going to be watching that's available to you out in Blackboard. Now, the WAI was responsible for coming up for the WCAG's standards checklist, so let's look at that. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, notice that there is a guideline. This one is saying text alternatives. Provide text alternatives for any non-text content. So for example, one of our coding standards is that any image that we use in this course needs to have an alt attribute. And notice in our success criteria, the WebAIMS recommendations has right there that images should have an equivalent alternative text. So that's an example of how you would use a checklist to make sure that your website is accessible. Not all websites are required to adhere to these standards, however, there are some that do. In 1973, we had this big legislative effort to make sure that we had an equal playing field for all people with disabilities. And then sections 504 and 508 impact our web design, where section 508 defines the minimum level of web accessibilities for websites that are developed or used by the federal government. So any of those websites have to adhere to the 508 checklist in order for them to continue to receive funding. And here's an example of that checklist. And again, if I scroll down, there's our standards and our pass and fail metrics. So even though not all websites at this time are required by law, some are to be accessible. It's up to us as developers to make sure that we're doing our utmost best to make sure all of our websites are accessible for everyone. And that starts with making sure that we adhere to our coding standards. But since there are so many different ones that are out there for accessibility that we need to be aware of, and it's hard to know what they are, we have tools that can help us with that. There's a lot of them that are free, and the one that we're going to use is called Axe. It's a Chrome plugin that's already installed on all of the Madison College computers, but we're going to go ahead and install that right now so you can see what that looks like. So I'll go to deque.com/Axe, and from here you can see the button that says Install Free Chrome Extension. Now if you're watching this video and it's changed a little bit, just know that this button is going to be somewhere on this page, even if it's not in the exact location that's showing on my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and install this free Chrome extension. It's going to ask me to fill in some information, so I'm going to go ahead and put in my first name, my last name, and my email through Madison College, and I'll hit submit. You may have screens that come up in between you're filling out that form and getting to this add to Chrome extension. If you do, go ahead and work through those. But we're going to add to Chrome, add extension. But before we can start using this, we have to make a couple of changes. At least one for sure. So let's go ahead and go into our extensions. So I'll go to More Tools, Extensions. And I'm going to select the Details button inside of the Axe DevTools Web Accessibility Testing. The big one that we really want to make sure that we're taking care of is to allow access to file URLs. I'll make sure that's turned on. Now that should be it. At this point, we should be able to use our extension. So I'll go back over to the Madison College website and we'll check out this page. First, I'll refresh the page. Then I'll open my developer's tools. I'll select this double arrow, and now you can see I have the Axe DevTools plugin. Now it's asking me to select my role. I'm just going to go ahead and pick developer. You can do the same. I'll accept the terms and I'll start using Axe DevTools. Then I'm going to scan all of my page. There's a total of 17 items on our page that we could address. Notice number 1, ID attribute values must be unique. Well, that's one of our coding standards. So you can see how important coding standards are to making sure that we're following all of the accessibility guidelines that are out there today. Let's shift our gears just a little bit and start talking about some web performance. And let's think about it in terms of how long we would take for our website to load. Does it matter if you're waiting for it to load on a mobile page or on a browser on your desktop? And if it does matter, why does it matter? There's two different main ways that we can improve our web performance. We can limit our file size, and we can reduce our request to the server. So remember back in that first video where I talked about as a page loads, if it sees additional things that it needs, it's going to reach back out to that server. Well, each one of those trips back to the server, that takes time. And although they may take milliseconds to go back and forth, there's a lot of it happening, so they add up pretty quickly. We can also limit the file size by doing things like optimizing our images or keeping our JavaScript to a minimum. If we don't need it, we don't want to load it onto the page. And if we don't need it in our code, we need to remove that from our code. Let's try that out. So we're going to go out again to the Madison College website here and use our developer tools one more time. So I'll open those up. This time I'm going to go to my double arrow and select Performance. And I'm going to go ahead and reload my page. And there's my results. If I were to scroll down here into the summary and look at what took the longest to load, I'll move this up so you can see it. take a look at how long scripting was. Now scripting could be JavaScript, but it was the most amount of time being taken to actually have my page load. And that's a pretty big indicator of how code can impact your website. But let's do the same thing, only we're going to use a site that is actually testing out our pages. So I'm at the webpagetest.org, and I'm going to enter in the Madison College website. And if you'll notice, it's giving me the option of running a simple configuration, but if I scroll down just a little bit, I want to run an advanced configuration. Here I can pick my location and my browser that I want to run the test from. So let's say I decide I want to run my location from, let's go to Ireland. And instead of Chrome, I'm curious what it would be like in Firefox. Now at this point, I can start my test. It's going to run a total of 3 tests. Well, I certainly didn't expect this test to take quite as long as it did, so I ended up having to edit this, cut it, and then speed up this section for you just so you wouldn't have to sit through this process. So let's go ahead and jump right straight to those results. Alright, we're back. It did finish, so let's take a look at what happened. I'll scroll down and look at our performance summary. I'm going to keep going all the way down until I get to the content breakdown on one example. Looking at this particular content breakdown, and let me zoom in for you. Our HTML was the simplest thing to load, but the things that took up the most amount of time was our JavaScript and how many images we were using. So what we put into our website and how we use it is going to play a huge factor in how our website performs over time. I'd have to say one big takeaway on this is if you don't need to have something, don't include it. Now if you have any questions on any of this content, please don't hesitate to ask.